Today on Pilot's Discretion, we're joined by professional pilot, mechanic, and educator Adrian Eichhorn. He talks about night flying, around-the-world flights, and Gulfstreams. Pilot's Discretion starts right now. Hi pilots, I'm John Zimmerman, and thanks for listening to Pilot's Discretion from Sporties. Remember to visit sporties.com/podcast for today's show links and access to all 118 episodes of the show. You can also send us an email with your comments, questions, and guest ideas anytime at podcast@sporties.com. Today, I'm happy to welcome Adrian Eichhorn to the show, another Pilot's Discretion guest with an incredibly diverse range of experience. He spent 20 years in the U.S. Army, during which time he learned to fly, and he retired as a lieutenant colonel. He then moved on to an impressive career as a professional pilot, flying VIP transport for the FAA, spending more than a decade as an airline captain, and is now a Gulfstream captain in corporate aviation. Adrian has ATP and flight instructor certificates and has logged more than 26,000 hours. But he's also a longtime A&P IA mechanic and restorer. A frequent writer and presenter on safety topics, he has been awarded both National Aviation Safety Counselor of the Year and National Maintenance Technician of the Year. Adrian, that is quite a resume, and welcome to Pilot's Discretion.
Well, thank you, John. Honored to be here. Appreciate this opportunity.
You've flown in a lot of different environments as a pro pilot. Major airline, large flight department, government, a lot of different airplanes. So I'm curious, what is consistent across all those environments? What are safety habits that are universal for pilots, no matter what you're flying and where you're flying?
Well, John, I think that's an excellent question. And looking back now, before any flight or any mission, I focus on four things. And I kind of try and analyze how each of these four areas may affect my flight. Because I've looked back over the years and analyzed mistakes that I've made in the cockpit, and thank God I've never bent an airplane or been violated or hurt anybody. But the big four for me are, I look to see if when I'm distracted, in a hurry, complacency, and fatigue. So those four topics or areas I think should be looked at on any flight, whether you're going to fly, a half hour to have lunch somewhere or go around the world in a single engine Bonanza. So I always, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about my performance. And in the airlines, distraction was big all the time because there's so much going on in the back of the cockpit while you're in the critical phase of getting the airplane ready to fly. Complacency, I've experienced that where you're flying like the same route, say New York, Boston, or Washington, New York, Washington, New York, New York, Washington. You might put your guard down because, well, we just did this. Fatigue, that was a constant battle on the round the world trip. And so I look at complacency, fatigue, being in a hurry, and distractions and how those may be encountered or how they would affect my flight and what I need to do to mitigate those topics.
Those are great four topics. Those are not ones you see in the airplane flying handbook, but definitely affect every pilot. I'm also curious what's different for you with solo flights versus passengers, because you've done a lot of both of those. You've done these long flights solo in that Bonanza, which we'll talk about a little bit later. You've done lots of flights with passengers, either airline or corporate. And I sometimes hear pilots say, oh, well, I wouldn't make that flight with passengers, but I would do that by myself. And I confess, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm not sure if I like that idea of having two different standards there or not. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm not so sure I like that either, John. But if I compare, say, flying my Bonanza, just a general aviation flight, whether I have passengers or not on board, I'm the pilot in command, and I am responsible for everything. And I think the average pilot doesn't realize that when you're an airline pilot, you have a ton of support. I've got crew services, crew schedule, I've got maintenance, I've got corporate security, I've got a gate agent. So as an airline captain, you walk up to the gate, dispatch hands you a lease, which has all of your NOTAMs, has any MELs that are on the airplane. You have a ton of people that are helping you to get that airplane away from the gate so the company can make revenue. So the support as an airline pilot is tremendous. When we're flying our GA airplanes, it's us. If the pilot doesn't do it, if he doesn't look at the NOTAMs, obtain a good weather briefing, make sure the maintenance on the airplane is complied with, no ADs are exceeded, it's not going to get caught. And it used to crack me up. I'd be sitting up in the front of the Airbus getting things ready, and when a passenger, and especially if you had a kid, would come on board and look up front, and I'd say, hey, come on up, and start talking to them. And the thing that used to drive me nuts is when they would say, I'm just a private pilot. I'm like, wait a minute, time out. I'm just an airline pilot. You have more responsibility as a private pilot. I shouldn't say that. A private pilot and an airline pilot have the same amount of responsibility. But the tasks that you have to do on your own, that nobody's going to do for you, are significant, are everything. Where I've got a cast of thousands to help me get this airplane off the gate and make my trip safely. And the thing about it, in the airline world, there's only two people that can cancel a flight. That's the captain and dispatch. And dispatch guys are licensed, they're trained, they do it every day. So if dispatch says you're good to go, you can pretty much rest assured that the weather is good, it's going to be a safe trip. Where as a private pilot, it's a complete opposite of that. So I think there's a little bit of misnomer with not responsibilities, but just who has to do how much work, because it's not the airline captain that has the tougher job.
It's a great distinction. It's something that I see new private pilots either embrace or get scared by. It's either a really exciting thing that I'm my own flight department, or can occasionally be overwhelming to them. But with experience, I think it can be really rewarding because you are dispatch and maintenance officer and the pilot in command and all of those. Mm-hmm. Adrian, certainly one of your most popular presentations over the years has been on night flying. This is something that, in my experience, most GA pilots just don't do a lot. So it feels unfamiliar. I look in my logbook. I do not have all that much nighttime considering all the trips I've flown. So looking back over those presentations you've made over the years, what are the most underrated risks that pilots should be thinking about when it comes to night flying? I mean, obviously we can't see as well, but what are some things that come into play at night that we don't give enough thought to?
Well, John, another great question. And I think it's different now from perhaps when we started to fly years ago, because we didn't have GPS. And now pretty much you can go direct anywhere. Where it used to be, if you flew an airway or you did a proper flight plan, you were probably going between two navigation aids and you would have some type of idea of the terrain below you and the minimum altitude. Now you can get yourself in trouble where you're flying over, mountainous terrain or even hills at night that's not densely lighted. And with GPSs, it's definitely made navigation easier. We fly direct almost everywhere now, at least I do, and a lot of people I'm with. So I think there's an added risk with that. I love night flying because even in a single engine airplane, in my case, I built the airplane or the engine. I know the airplane well, so I'm not really worried about it like some people are, because I know and I trust the airplane. But there's added risk with flying at night. And I think the biggest challenge is just always having a plan B. Plan A would be, okay, we're going from, say, Manassas to Richmond. And if we don't make it to Richmond for whatever reason, what is my plan B? Am I going to head to the water? Am I going to head to some farmlands? Where are the terrain? Am I going to land close to where there's lights? If I'm injured, then somebody can perhaps come and help me get out of the airplane so I don't bleed to death. So the thing about night flying is there are different risks than daytime, but if you're aware of those risks and you know how to mitigate them, and it does take extra planning, and you should always be aware of what the terrain below you is. We live in Virginia, so we have the Appalachian Mountains, and there's a lot of hills. And on a moonless night, those hills are completely dark. And you may think that you're clear of terrain when, in fact, you're not. So, fortunately, with ADS-B and ForeFlight, there's so many other measures or tools out there that can help us with that. So it's good, obviously, that you know how to use that and get the benefit of what they offer.
So talk to me about airport lighting, and in particular, why the overlooked, unloved chart supplement, the old airport facility directory, the Green Book, why does that still have a role for me in 2025?
That's a very, very, very good question. Because the airport facility directory, or whatever it's called now, and I think the information to us now is more readily available, especially on ForeFlight and some of the other apps, but it was really the only single source where you could go to find out what lights were pilot control, what lights the airport had or didn't have. And I remember years ago, I was flying to an airport down in Florida, and there was no rotating beacon on the chart, but there was a rotating beacon there, and the rotating beacon was pilot controlled. And that's a lot more common now than what perhaps people realize, unless they do actively fly at night. It's a great way for the airport to save energy. There's no sense for the rotating beacon to be burning, using up power all night long when it can be controlled with a microphone, just like the runway, or with the click of a microphone, just like the runway lights are. And the research that I did is every single lighting system we have, to include like an ALSF2, the granddaddy of the approach light systems on a Cat 2 or Cat 3 ILS, can be pilot controlled. So it's the single source that you can go to find out what lighting you either have or don't have, because I kind of look at airports like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're going to get till you're there, because airports that are not certified for, say, 121 operation, they may or may not have airport lighting like the lighting you're used to of flying out of your home station.
Yeah, so much of night flying comes down to that pre-flight preparation. You mentioned briefing the terrain you're flying over in alternate airports. You mentioned the phase of the moon, which is something I think a lot of pilots may not think about, but the difference between a full moon and a new moon at night is dramatic for flying. We talked about airport lighting there and how to really make sure you know, are they pilot controlled? And if so, what frequency are they on? What else changes when you plan a night flight? Do you have different minimums for weather or fuel or the length of the legs you'll fly? What are the other things that go into your decision-making for a night flight?
I think you hit on them all. If you're an instrument-rated pilot, I would recommend making all of your night flights instrument rating, because you're talking with somebody. So you've already established contact, and time can be critical, especially if you're at a lower altitude where you've got somebody that you immediately can talk with. So those are all good things, John. I like to raise my weather minimums when I'm flying at night. Flying an ILS down to minimum, because I do it so often, is not a big event for me. But being at night, it's no different procedure, but your visibility can go down. When your visibility changes, say due to mist or cloud cover, it can give you the false perception of being higher or closer or farther away from the airport. So until you get a lot of experience under your belt with knowing how that weather affects your visibility for, say, that approach, it's something, when I talk with people that are interested in flying at night, it's kind of, I relate it to the Army's training philosophy: crawl, walk, run. Don't go out and do a really difficult night flight where it's marginal VFR or, say, IFR as your first flight. Go out, get current on a night with a full moon, and then gradually work towards making it a more challenging night flight, because you have less leeway with flying at night, because the weather can change and your options may go way down below what you're comfortable in flying in.
So I want to pivot to another topic, because you have presented and written on so many that I want to get your input on a few of these. And this one is on borescopes and engines, because you're not just a pilot, you're a mechanic, you restored airplanes, you know your way around the toolbox. We've talked about borescopes multiple times on the show. Colleen Sterling was on earlier this year talking about the value of borescopes and the work they're doing at Savvy with it. So I think many pilots these days understand the basic idea. I'm going to stick a tiny camera in the cylinder of my aircraft engine. I'm going to take a look around. But help us understand what the big deal is here. I mean, some people say borescopes are just another gadget and we do it because we can. But where do they actually make the difference?
Well, I think, John, let's start with when you do an annual or 100-hour inspection, a compression test is what's required by the FAR to determine whether your cylinders are healthy. And a compression test can yield a lot of false positives. You pump in a measly 80 psi into the cylinder when the piston's at top dead center. You open a couple valves, you see how much air the cylinder will retain. Air can leak past rings, which means the rings are worn. If it leaks past an exhaust valve, it means that the valve may be warped or just not seated properly due to some debris between the seat of the valve and the seat of the cylinder. So a compression test is the required test, but if I was king for a day, I would eliminate the compression test and make a borescope test mandatory. The compression test was written into the FARs probably in the 50s when we really didn't have any other way to determine how do you judge cylinder health. So along comes borescopes, and I started off about 25 years ago with an oral endoscope, which later went to a surgical endoscope that I have hooked up to a 37-inch HD screen in my hangar. So I'll stick the camera. All you have to do on a borescope is pull out a spark plug, stick the camera in, and you can look at any number of things. You can look at the walls of the cylinder for scoring. You can look at the intake valve, the exhaust valve, the area around the spark plug helicoil for cracks. In most of our engines, the weak link is the exhaust valve. So you can look at the exhaust valve and see a pattern. The main message I like to say is you look for symmetry. That means the valve is rotating and the heat is being distributed evenly around the valve when it exits the exhaust port, and the absence of green on the valve turning green. Green means bad. Green means stop. So a borescope it's not just a silly gadget. It's a very, very valuable test. And in my opinion, it's the only real test that you can do to determine the health of the valves. I got together with AOPA and we developed a poster typed Anatomy of an Exhaust Valve Failure. It's a 2-foot by 3-foot poster with some really good pictures of healthy valves, valves in various stages of failure. And it is primarily to educate owners, pilots, and mechanics about what they're looking for because, 20 years ago, we didn't have these very inexpensive, very capable borescopes, which we do have now. So I 100% advocate having a borescope because you can determine the health of your cylinder much better than any other test. But a borescope in conjunction with oil analysis, filter analysis, dye penitent test, if you think there's some type of a crack, and a compression test, use about 5 or 6 different ways. You can determine, is my engine really healthy? But a borescope is an invaluable test to do.
And from an operation standpoint, you mentioned the exhaust valve. That's the weak link, often what fails first or causes trouble. What should I do as a pilot to protect that exhaust valve? How can I be gentler on that part of my engine and my engine overall? What matters?
I think the most important thing, Johnny, you talk with anybody, any of the engine manufacturers or shops that build engine, that's keeping cylinder head temperature down. On your big bore Continentals, you want to stay below 400 degrees. Lycomings are they tolerate heat a little bit better, maybe 420, but keeping your cylinder head temperature down, whether you're running lean a peak or rich a peak, I think that's the most valuable thing you can do. Good baffling, balance injectors, especially on a 6-cylinder engine, so that you can keep your fuel air mixture pretty much the same with all of them. But it's a simple answer to a question which we could talk about for hours, but that is simply keeping that cylinder temperature down.
And is there such a thing as too cool? If less than 400 is good, should I get it under 300? Or is there a point where it no longer pays off?
Well, if you can do that, let me know because, but no, I don't think that's possible. Oil temperatures is another thing. You want to get your oil temperature warm enough to burn the air entrained water out of the oil. 160, 180 degrees. But no, as far as cylinder head temperature, I've never seen cylinders run under 300, but if you're running at 320 to 340 to 360, it's all good. That's critical.
Adrian, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, let's talk about some of your long distance flights.
As a pilot, you know continuous learning is the key. But who has time for boring study sessions? Over 200,000 pilots skip the dry reading and subscribe to the free Pilot's Tip of the Week from Pilot Workshops. Every Wednesday, you get 2 minutes or less of practical advice from top experts. We cover everything from airmanship and IFR to weather and emergencies. These lessons instantly build your confidence and proficiency. Plus, you get useful videos and downloads with every tip. Become a safer pilot this week. Sign up now at pilotworkshops.com/tip. Now, back to Pilot's Discretion.
We are back with Adrian Eichhorn, who does not just fly jets. In fact, he has twice made very long flights in his 1962 Bonanza, which he spent 20 years restoring, by the way. First, Adrian, in 2016, I know you flew 24,000 miles around the world, and then apparently you didn't have enough fun. So in 2021, you completed a 21-hour solo flight over the North Pole. Those are really long flights. And I know you do really long flights now in your day job flying corporate jets around. So what's different in those long international flights in a Bonanza versus a Gulfstream? How do you approach those differently?
Well, John, I did these trips to challenge what I've done in aviation over the years and to provide me with experience where I could share with other pilots. And that's after the round the world trip. And actually before that, I had two guys, Bill Compton, who lives up in Alaska, and John Whitehead, who lives down in Texas. John retired as the number one pilot at FedEx, who spent his whole life flying around the world. And Dr. Compton up in New York is a Bonanza guy who's flown many long distance flights. So we had a team. They were my ground support team. And we talked about this trip and how we would approach each leg. And that's where we kind of formulated that fatigue, distractions, being in a hurry, and complacency, in addition to all the technical parts of, okay, well, we're flying from St. John's, Newfoundland to Santa Maria and the Azores. What kind of challenges are we going to have? Is there going to be HF? What are the frequencies? What are the things that we're going to encounter? The chance of icing, and the list is long. But, when you do a trip like that, your situational awareness has to be sharp all the time because you're flying, once you get outside the United States, ICAO standards, and things are different. Flying is flying. The navigation on all of my legs was the easy part because of GPS. I never lost signal. So 30 years ago, when the guys were doing the round-the-world trips in Bonanzas, the initial Earth Rounders from down in Texas, they didn't even have Loran when they first started doing it. So their challenges were completely different from mine because back then everybody loved the United States. And now, as everybody knows, it's not quite the same. So most of my challenges were on the ground with the airports, with permits, clearances, understanding the clearances and the restrictions. One event that I had, I was flying from Dubai down to Sri Lanka. Thunderstorms in the intertropical convergence zone down there are the most severe thunderstorms on the planet because the tropopause is so high, the thunderstorms grow very, very high. And my route that I filed was to take me off the coast of India so I wouldn't have to go over land where the thunderstorms were developing and down around the tip of India to Sri Lanka. Well, they amended my clearance to take me over land, and I didn't want to do that, and they wouldn't change it. So I said, okay, I'll cancel IFR and I'll go VFR. And they said, well, you can't do that. And I go, why not? He says, because we don't have VFR flight at night. So I had to stay on the IFR flight plan. I got beat up pretty badly just fighting the storms down there, but just a lot of extra planning and research that you have to do before you go.
So you mentioned the weather deviation there, which I'm very curious about, because I'm curious what's different on those long flights, international. You don't have ADS-B weather. You may not have any weather of any kind. You probably have less flexibility, as you alluded to. So how do you handle that? Do you just take extra fuel? Do you do more pre-flight preparation? Do you have different weather tools? How do you decide when you're on a 8-hour leg, which way to go and which altitude to use?
That's a real challenge depending where you are. There's pretty good weather advisories all throughout Europe, but when I was flying from Sri Lanka down to Kuala Lumpur, the thunderstorms over Sabang were terrible. And I told the control, I said, hey, it's really bad weather up here. Can you give me a weather advisory? And they go, we don't provide weather advisories. So there are parts of the world. And man, I was scared, John. It was really bad. I couldn't keep altitude within 1,000 feet. Rain was coming in through the overhead eyeball vents. And I did what, I won't say I found a sucker hole, but I found a very big opening. I took a 90-degree turn and went out over the ocean and deviated off of my flight plan and just went down low. I was probably at 1,000 feet, and I'm driving along the bottom of the thunderstorms because I could see where the rain showers were coming down, and made it into Kuala Lumpur. It was pretty hairy flight. And then 2 days later, when I planned to fly down to Fiji into Australia, they wouldn't let me back into Indonesian airspace because I had deviated without permission. But I thought, okay, this is a difference of the plane breaking up and me possibly being killed versus let's just take this situation and do what we have to do to survive. So that was probably the only really bad experience that I had on any trip that I've made. But there are a lot of parts of the world where there are no advisories, and it's just something that you have to be aware of before you go there. There was no ForeFlight, no ADS-B weather back when I did that trip.
And what's the most you paid for avgas on that trip, dare I ask?
That one's pretty funny because I think I failed geography in high school. I thought most of our oil came from the Middle East, but when I was in Dubai, I paid $26 a gallon.
Oh, my goodness.
And you had to buy it in a 55-gallon drum, and I needed 2.5 drums. So I painfully left, 20-some gallons at $26 a gallon there. But yeah, that was the worst.
Unbelievable.
I know.
If I think I want to do one of these trips, A, would you suggest I even consider it? And B, what are some baby steps? You mentioned crawl, walk, run. What are some ways to ease into that world of long distance flights?
Well, first of all, I would highly recommend if you're thinking about doing it, because for me, the real enjoyment was the preparation that went into the flight to eliminate all the potential risks, the preparation of making the airplane as perfect as it could be, because when you fly north of Bangor, Maine, and you're outside the lower 48, there is very little GA, and there's almost no recip, no piston GA up there. There's planes full turbine and jets, obviously, but so the preparation is challenging. It's rewarding for both getting the airplane ready and getting the all the risk and the details for making the flight. But unfortunately, it's becoming more and more difficult because just a few years ago, the FAA no longer allows field approvals to be made to airplanes when it comes to any type of a modification to the fuel system on the airplane. You're going to need ferry tanks. You can't go through Russia, at least at the moment. So getting through the Pacific is your biggest challenge. And the longest leg, I think, of any place in the world is from Honolulu back to Oakland. And for me, that was a 17-hour flight. So I need a lot of gas. And fortunately, I was able to get a field approval and get these enormous tip tanks approved for the airplane. But I think anybody that wants to do it should do it. On a negative note, there's a lot of people lately that have been doing to be the youngest ever to fly, and I don't support that at all. The thing I've learned over the years is good judgment comes from experience. And when you have no experience, you shouldn't be attempting to do something like that. The advent of GPS, the navigation is not the challenge, but all the other things, the international NOTAMs, the differences in procedures, whether it's on the ground or in the air, is what can get people hurt, the lack of weather. So I think I encourage anybody to do it. And what is great now is just reach out to former Earth rounders. And of course, with the internet, you can do so much more than you could, say, 30 years ago. So talk with people that have done it, find out what went right, what didn't go right, and definitely proceed it, because it's rewarding. And then when you get back, being able to share your stories with others is rewarding as well.
All right, Adrian, we always close the show with the lightning round we call Ready to Copy. So I'll throw out some rapid fire questions on a wide range of topics, and you read back with your quick answer. You ready to copy?
All right. Can I call a friend?
Absolutely not. You're solo, just like you're over the North Pole right now.
Okay.
All right, you're a night flying guy. So how many flashlights do you think you own?
In the Bonanza, I have four flashlights, 2 decelled flashlights, and then 2 smaller ones, one in the glove box, one in the center armrest, and the big ones I keep in the back. So I have 4.
What color light do you prefer on those flashlights? White, red, green, blue, something else?
I use white. I think for years the preferred was red. I've heard now that blue is the preferred lighting, but I have white for the walk around. And one of my flashlight is red, but back when we had IFR and sectional charts, you needed a different light because it was harder to read. But now with everything being on iPads or on the screens, it's not as important. So I think I don't think any of those make that big of a difference. You don't want to have it too bright to obviously to affect your night vision.
What is the strangest airport you've ever landed at?
Without question, it was Majuro. On my way from Guam to Hawaii. It's a little atoll. Went in at about 11 o'clock at night, raining like hell. Raining really hard. And when I landed, they didn't know that when I was coming. For some reason, my arrival time didn't get passed along to the airport. But Majuro is surrounded with about a 4-foot tall concrete berm, and it's the freshwater collection point for the whole island. So actually, when I landed, the runway was being flooded. So when I touched down, water's everywhere. The plane is just kind of hydroplaning. I had no idea what was going on. So when I went into the ops center, they had 1733 Golf was arriving, but they didn't have the time. So they were flooding the runway to collect fresh water. So that was something I had never thought I was going to experience. So that's a little one I don't think anybody will ever go to, but it's a small island out by Anahuac, and where they did a lot of the nuclear testing prior to World War II.
That's incredible. That is one I've never heard from any pilot ever. So you win.
Yeah.
Describe the Gulfstream G650 in 5 words or less.
Fast, comfortable, stays aloft way too long. We just flew Tokyo to Miami nonstop, 12 hours, 15 minutes, and had 8,800 pounds of gas left. So,
wow. And who likes it better, the pilots or the passengers in that airplane?
Oh, I think, we have all the fun up front. They get to sleep in back, watch the movies, watch the football games. I think the pilots.
What is the longest single leg you've flown in that airplane or any airplane?
I went from London to Singapore, about 14 hours.
And how do you stay awake on a 14-hour trip?
Okay, so that was the longest in a Gulfstream. I didn't look at your question. The longest in an airplane was my trip from Reykjavik, circled the North Pole, and ended up in Fairbanks. That was 21 hours nonstop. It was about 10 hours to the pole, 10 hours back. And John, that's a simple one-word answer, how you stay awake. It's called fear. It's one engine, one HF radio, navigation at a minimum, and you know that you're flying over terrain when it's minus 45 degrees outside, that if anything happens, if you have to revert to plan B, it's probably not going to have a good outcome. So 21 hours into Bonanza, and that was without question the most challenging and most rewarding flight I've ever had.
Wow. I think I would be looking at the oil pressure gauge the entire 21 hours, but maybe that's just me.
No, that's a good one.
I know you got to fly the Dash 8 a little bit. So what's different about flying that versus Gulfstreams and Challengers? Do you have to put on a different pilot hat for that?
Yeah, you sure do. The Dash 8 is slow. The ones I was flying for the Army, we had a 10,000-pound fuel tank in it. So taking off out of Manassas on a mission on a hot day, the performance was marginal at best. Very slow airplane, but those big propellers and turbo prop engines. It's that one has a spot in my heart. The Gulfstreams are amazing. You can fly them all over the world. They rarely ever break. The performance is amazing. The endurance is amazing. And it's very comfortable, very capable airplane. The 650 is a 990 airplane all day long. So it gets you there in a hurry.
What is your favorite thing to teach at a Beechcraft Pilot Proficiency Program training event? Something I know you've done a lot over the years.
Yeah, I think the value of a borescope inspection. About 10 years ago, I decided to get away from pilot seminars because there's so many people doing that. And I realized there's really not a lot of people that are out there teaching owners and pilots about how to be an airplane owner, how to determine whether this shop is the appropriate shop for you. How you should think of yourself as a director of maintenance. How do you manage your annual inspection? So I saw, because as well as anybody, there's no requirement to learn anything about airplane ownership or maintenance when you're getting a rating. And most flight instructors don't have backgrounds in maintenance. And fortunately, I get to see maintenance through the eyes of an airplane owner and a mechanic. So I like teaching folks about aircraft ownership, maintenance, and particularly the value of the borescope inspection.
And what's your favorite single feature of the Bonanza?
It's well built. When I had a Seminole prior to this, and when I sold the Seminole, I looked at a lot of different airplanes, everything from long easies to Stardusters to Pitts. And then I realized, I want an airplane that I can take people with, go on long distances. And if I ever have an engine failure and have to make an off-field landing, I thought I'd probably stand the best chance of surviving in a Bonanza because of the quality and the way the airplane is built. Not to mention the looks of the VTOL. I'm sorry. A VTOL at heart.
I was going to push you on that because anybody who owns a Bonanza has got to think it looks good, right?
It does.
In your Army career, I know you spent some time as strategic nuclear advisor, which is definitely a unique role, one I'm not sure I would want. What new skills did you have to learn for that job?
We could talk about that one for quite a while, John. I had 3 years left before I was going to retire and get out and pursue my career in aviation. And I was looking for a job. And a friend of mine informed me that there was a position available, a strategic nuclear advisor to the president. He said, you ought to apply for it. And I said, I have no experience with nuclear weapons, whether they're operational or technical, or no experience whatsoever. And that turned out to go in my favor when I interviewed and was selected for the job because, we have nuclear triad. We have subs, bombers, and missiles. And the nuclear advisor to the president has to be impartial about what option what platform to use. They all have pluses and minuses. A missile gets there fast, but once it's launched, it discloses where its location and the other location of missiles are. A bomber takes a long time to get from point A to point B, but it can be turned around and the missile can be canceled. A sub can fire and go hide, so it's a survivable asset. So it was a very challenging job to learn all of the things that were required so you could give the president the right option in the event of a nuclear attack. And when I was in that position, our national strategy was we didn't use nuclear weapons for first strike. It was just for retaliatory measures. So there would have to have been a launch against the United States first. And based on what that launch was and what its target category was, would be what our response would be and how we would retaliate. So went into it blind. I was an Army engineer, combat engineer, and the fact that I had no previous bias to a particular weapon system actually went in my favor, and the other guy that was selected along the same time that I was also had no previous experience.
Fascinating look into that world. Thanks for sharing that with us. On a somewhat lighter note, we're going to close with the question we always close with. You have one final flight. We want to know, what are you flying and where are you going?
Planning the South Pole next year. So fly down to Punta Arenas, Chile, take off and circle the South Pole and come back. And that's going to be an extremely challenging undertaking because of the distance and getting across the Davis Straits. You know, you've got the cold Arctic temperature down there and the warm ocean. And it's a wind factory down there, and the turbulence is almost always severe. So next December, a good friend of mine, Bill Harrelson, made that trip in a Lancer 4 that he built. He's flown around the world in both directions and over the North Pole and the South Pole. He's been a great mentor to me, and he's going to be on my ground support team helping me do that. And it's going to be even a bigger challenge in the North Pole because of the distance. But that's the one I'm looking forward to next.
Adrian, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you, John. Good luck.
Thanks for listening to Pilot's Discretion, brought to you by Sporties, training and equipping pilots worldwide for over 60 years. For more episodes and today's show links, visit sporties.com/podcast. I'm John Zimmerman. We'll see you next time on Pilot's Discretion.